Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Discovering Xflow webinar. This session is going to take approximately 20 minutes, so there is time for questions at the end of the session. Please remain muted during the session and put any questions that you have in the meeting chat, and then any questions that we're not able to answer during the session, we'll add to the frequently asked questions section of the webinar web pages. So during the session today, we're going to be having a look at accessing Xflow. We'll look at the Xflow icons that you can use to create your call flow. We'll look at building the call flow using the Xflow system, the call flow functions that you have to assist your build and testing, the templates that you can use to set up the call flows, and changing group call priorities within the configuration console. So looking at accessing Xflow, first of all, Xflow is our call flow system that will enable you to see a graphical representation of the call flow that you have on your telephone numbers that come into the practice. So when you're accessing Xflow, to start a new call flow on a new number, it's best to go via the service delivery console and then select numbers. So when you log in to our single sign-on, you'll be given the 9 boxes as a supervisor. If you click on the service delivery console box and then move on to the numbers menu at the top of the page, which will be just up by your initials at the top there. When you select numbers, you'll then be given a list of the numbers and call flows that you currently have set up for your particular practice. Up at the top of the list, you'll see a button marked as Add New Call Flow. So to begin a new call flow, you can click on Add New Call Flow and then allocate the number to the particular flow. So clicking on Add New Call Flow will bring up a pop-up box for you. You can now select the number that you want to be attached to this particular call flow. So we're going to be setting up an emergency bypass call flow. So when you click in the numbers there, you will have the unassigned numbers that are available on your particular practice. So you can select any of those numbers to then become the number that you're assigning here. You can then give the call flow a name. Usually we would keep that quite descriptive so we know what we're using here. So for me, I'm going to set this as the emergency bypass call flow. And then there are also templates that you can use that we'll look at the end of the session. So when you select the template, it will give you a preview of what you're going to see, and I will show you those at the end. We're going to start with an empty call flow though, so that I can show you how to build a call flow from scratch there. Once you've made your selections there, and the only thing that you really need to do is to give it a name, you can then click on Save Call Flow, and that will then load up the call flow for you from the service delivery console. It will open a new tab because it's opening Xflow, so you'll see a new tab open on your browser. That will then bring you to the Xflow desktop. So up at the top here, we've got the name of the call flow that we're setting up. Down the left-hand side of the screen here, you've got call flow icons. Each of these icons can be dragged onto the desktop to create something in the call flow, and we'll go through each of those icons during this webinar. You've got your main desktop area here, which is gridded, so that you can build the call flow on the desktop itself and then actually see where the call goes from that point. On the top right-hand corner, you will have a version warning and your deploy button. So any changes that you make to an existing call flow will save first of all to the test number that will be allocated alongside your main number. That test number can then be used to test the call flow, and when you're happy with it at the end of the call flow, we will deploy it so that this then transfers over onto the number that's currently in use. Just at the top of the screen, we've then got the call flow functions. You can use these functions when you are creating the call flow or to see the path of a call through the particular call flow. And we'll go through all of the call functions at the end of this session. So first of all, we're going to have a look at the icons. So the first icon we have here is a phone. And if you drag that onto the desktop, that will be the start point for any call flow. So that start phone there will allow you to allocate and manage any numbers that follow this particular call flow. Our next icon here is a menu, and the menu will allow you to give different choices to your patients or to the callers, so you can separate calls out to different teams. So our standard menu usually has call 1 for appointments, 2 for prescriptions, and 3 for reception. Our next icon here is the mode switch. This is the only bit of jargon really that's on here. So the mode switch is a calendar lookup. So you can set calendars on the system to control the opening times, usually of your main telephone number, but you can also use them to control opening times into different teams as well, if you don't want calls going through to them outside certain times. Our next icon here is a little speaker, and that's the prompts that are read out to the caller. Each prompt will show in green, and you can customize those prompts to say exactly what you want. When you drag a prompt over onto the desktop, it will automatically drag in a hang up after that. So once that prompt is read, it would automatically hang up, but we can delete that and tell the system to do something else, as I'll show you during the webinar. Our next icon here is our whispers. These are the voices that the team hear in their ear when a call comes through. So it's either going to say direct call if it goes through to somebody's extension, or it will tell them the name of the group that the call has come through if the patient's made different choices there. Next, we have our user, and when you drag on a user, it will ask you the name of the user that you want to import. So this is usually used for a direct dial number, and it will also import a whisper box so that you can set the whisper for that call, and also an answer so that it will connect the call once that call has been answered. You can also set up user voicemail, which is the next icon down, the little user with a cog there. That sets up a standard voicemail box and will also then automatically hang up when the call has been recorded. Next, we have our groups. The groups will match the groups that you've set up on the service delivery console. So when you drag on a group, it will ask you which group you want to have allocated to those particular calls. So I've dragged on our emergency bypass group that's set up in our service delivery console. That will automatically add a whisper and a failure prompt just in case nobody is logged into that team when the phone lines should be open. Within the groups, you can also manage the playlist that the caller is hearing when they are queuing. And you can also activate QBuster through the group as well. Our next icon here is the group with a cog. So that's our group voicemail. And again, that has a standard voicemail message and then will automatically hang up on the caller. Next, we have our group behavior. Now, if you have a menu with different options, but all your calls are still answered by one team, rather than setting up different groups, you can use the group behavior here, and that will change the whisper and the playlist depending on the choice that the patient has made within the menu. You can also have the system send out an automatic text for you. So an SMS will be sent through the call flow. This would be very generic and wouldn't have any specific patient information in. And then our final icon here is to actually add an external transfer. So if your calls are answered by a third party outside your opening times, the calls can be transferred to that third party directly through the call flow when that's necessary. So now we're going to have a look at actually building the call flow. So I've started with an empty call flow, which has brought up my start option here. I can then drag and drop icons from the left onto the desktop to create the call flow. Once the icons are on the desktop, I can then double click on each icon to customize it. So if I were to double click onto the phone icon here, it will show me the test number that I've currently got assigned to this call flow. Now, when I set this call flow up, I didn't have any spare numbers, so it's not assigned a live number. However, I can do that directly from the call flow screen here, and I can actually add a spare unassigned number directly to the call flow on the call flow desktop. So if I click on add live number here, it will then give me the same list of unassigned numbers as it would do when you were setting the call flow up. So I've selected a number from the list. I can then confirm add. It's then going to tell me that when I save this block and then deploy the call flow, that number will be assigned to this particular call flow. So I'm going to confirm the add here. That will then put the number on our start. So now both of these numbers would then be affected when we deploy this call flow by the call flow that we set up. I now want to answer this call. So we're going to drag in a prompt box to then answer the call to the caller. When I drag on a new prompt box, it will automatically bring on the hang up, but we can delete that shortly. I'm then going to customize this prompt box by double clicking onto the prompt on the desktop, and that will then bring up the prompt properties. On the first tab, I can change anything on here. So I can give it a new name so it's more descriptive. I can change the description on the prompt, and I can also set whether the patient can press any button on their phone, play a sound and skip this message. So in most parts, you're going to want to set this can interrupt to no, so that they don't skip the message and miss information that you're giving them during the call flow. So I'm going to fill those details in. So I've got my welcome prompt here and I've changed the can interrupt to no. I can then click on the audio tab within the properties to either upload my own recording or to set the text to speech so that the system will read out any messages that I then type in. So up at the top of the prompt audio source here, you can swap that to your own recording. You can record those locally on your PC and then upload them into the prompt at the relevant point in the call flow. However, most practices now are going text to speech. You can also select the voice, so we have a selection of male and female voices here, and then enter the text that you want the system to read out at that point in the call flow. So I've selected Josh as my voice. I'm leaving it on text to speech, and I want it to answer the call with the name of our practice. I can then preview what I've typed in at the bottom, so it will actually play it out in the voice that I've done, and I can add in pauses if I need to make it sound a little bit more human and give the patient time to react to what's actually been said. Once we've previewed, I can then click on save, and that will then rename the prompt as I have done on the first tab, and then save the text in there as well. If you click on the desktop, it will remove any of the dotted lines around the prompt box and the hang up. And then to remove the hang up, just click on the little red phone itself, so you get dotted lines around it. You can then either use delete up at the top of the screen, or you can use the delete button on your keyboard to remove that particular hang up. I now want to join up the numbers to our first prompt that will answer the call, and I can use the dots here to join up the call flow, and that will be the way that the patient then flows through the call. So if I click on the dots and join one to the other, it will then bring a little arrow for me, and that shows the direction of the call flow, so we know it's going from the number, and then the first thing that's going to happen is it's going to be answered. The next thing I'm going to do is actually set up a calendar so that it will check to see if the practice is currently open or if there's any other event on the calendar that will affect that. So I'm going to drag on a mode switch now and bring that over, and when I bring the mode switch onto the desktop, it will ask me which calendar I want to associate to this particular mode switch. I'm going to select the main calendar because it's the main number that I want to copy the opening times from. That will then bring the icon onto the desktop, and I can now customize that just the same as I did my welcome prompt. So I've selected the main calendar from the when I was dragging it on. If I now click on the visible outputs, that will then allow me to select the modes that are on your calendar that this particular calendar lookup is looking for. So you'll be given a list of all the modes that you have available. Because this is going to be an emergency bypass number, I don't need all of them on my calendar. I only need some of them. So I'm going to select the emergency, the holiday, open and closed, and have different actions for each of those things. I can then click on save, and that will then add those outputs to our calendar on the desktop. I can now join up my welcome prompt to my main calendar, again just by clicking on one dot and then dragging to the next. The next thing that I need to do is to set up prompts for any closed output. I'm going to start with the closed ones because they're the easiest ones to do. It's going to play a message and then it's going to automatically hang up on the patient or the caller. So to do that, I'm just going to drag another prompt box onto the desktop. Again, I'm going to double click so that I can customize the prompt. I'm going to change this one to our emergency prompt. So this is what it's going to read out in the event of an emergency where we need to close the practice without any warning. Again, I've changed can interrupt to no to make sure that the patient doesn't skip this message. And then I'm going to click on the audio tab, change my voice and enter the text that I want the system to read out in the event of an emergency. Now, because this is our emergency bypass line, there's nowhere to refer this caller to. If it was a patient call on your main call flow, that would normally, any closed message, we would normally refer them to 111 or 999 if it was an emergency. Again, you can preview and then save that text, and that will then update the prompt on the screen. Now, this time I actually want to keep the hang up because once they've heard that message, I want the system to automatically hang up on the caller so that they can then dial another number. So all I need to do now is to join the dots so that the if there's an emergency on the calendar, it will then play that emergency prompt for us. I'm now going to do the same for bank holidays, which will come under the holiday, and for our closed. And the default is if there's anything else on your calendar that it's not looking for here. So I'm going to copy the closed in a default situation. So I'm going to drag over a couple more prompt boxes, and then I can customize those to my holiday and my closed messages. Again, join the dots up, and you can just drag as many arrows to the same dot as you need to, so that those routes will follow the same path there. Next, I'm going to set what happens when the practice is actually open. So I need to tell the callers that all the calls are recorded for training or monitoring purposes. So I'm going to drag over another prompt and set that as my call recording prompt. I've got my call recording prompt here. I don't want it to hang up this time. So again, I'm going to delete the hang up here by clicking on the red phone and then either using delete at the top or delete on my keyboard. I can now join up my open to my call recording prompt. And the next thing that I want it to do is then to queue for one of the team to actually answer this call. At this point, I could also insert a menu if it was a main call flow, which would then get your patients to make different choices during the call flow there. But as this is the emergency bypass, we're going to bring over a group now to answer the calls that come in to that number. Now, the group is already set up on the service delivery console and all the users have been added to the group so that they can then answer those calls. So I'm going to drag over a group. That will then ask me which group from the service delivery console I want to use. And in this case, it's our emergency bypass group. I can then click on add and it will add the group, the whisper and a failure prompt as well as the call connection and hang up. So it will do a lot of the work for you with your group. All you need to do is customize the whisper. So it now tells them the name of the group when the call comes through. And also customize your failure prompt just in case nobody's logged in when the phone line should be open. I could also customize the group here and change the playlist, which is what the patients hear whilst they're queuing. And you can see how to change your playlist and add information into the playlist in our Informing Your Patients webinar. You can also activate queue busting. So again, that can be seen in our Queue Buster webinar. Once I've activated either of those, I can click on save. And these are all now customized. So I've got my emergency whisper and also the failure. I can now join these two up. And that's my call flow completed. So what I can do now is auto arrange this call flow using the function buttons up at the top. That will then space out the call flow so it's a little easier to read on the screen. Now that it's all spaced out, all I need to do is to make sure that we deploy this call flow when you're happy with the testing. So you can now use your test number to call the call flow and it will follow the call flow through, matching anything that you have on your calendar there. You can also use the test overrides, as I'll show you shortly, to force the particular mode on a calendar so that you can hear specific messages when you're doing your call testing there. Once you're happy, click on the deploy button. It will then ask you to give that a description. And if you can be as descriptive as you possibly can and make sure that you put any changes that you've done on that particular call flow, that will then enable you, if you ever need to go back to a previous call flow, to load previous and to see exactly what it is that you'll be removing when you go back to a previous version. Once the call flow is deployed, you'll get a little success message. That is then available on the live number, so on your main number that you set at the beginning of the call flow. Once you've deployed the call flow, your version warning will disappear. So this is currently the messages then that your callers will be hearing, and the deploy button will go grey. So let's have a look at the functions up at the top of the screen. So we've got load. Now, if you access the Xflow system from anywhere other than through the service delivery console, when you get into the desktop, you will need to load up the call flow that you want to use. So using the load button on the screen will allow you to pick the call flow via either the name, which you've given it, or by a telephone number selected on the screen there. Load previous, as I've said, we'll go back to a previous version of the call flow, so a previous deployed version. So these are the descriptions that we've put in as we've made changes so that we can clearly see exactly what it is we'd be removing if we went back to a previous version. That is really useful though if you've added in a prompt that's only a temporary prompt and you then want to go back to a version where you don't have that prompt in. Our next buttons here are undo, which allows you to undo actions. So if you drag on the wrong icon from the icons on the left-hand side, you can undo that and reverse the actions that you've made to the call flow. And you can use redo to replace the action when you use undo. Delete, as we've seen, will delete the selected object. So anything that you have a little dotted line around, if you click on delete, it will remove that from your call flow. But you can also use the delete key on your keyboard. The highlight option will show you the path of the call through the call flow to the selected point. So if you switch highlight on and then select the end of your call flow, it will show you the path that the call has taken through that particular call flow. Auto arrange will rearrange the layout of the call flow so it's easier to read, and test overrides will allow you to force a calendar onto a selected mode so that you can test on your test number without affecting your live call flow. So if you click on the test overrides, it will give you a drop down then of the calendars that you have on your call flow. So we only had the main calendar, and I could swap that to any function. So I could swap it into the bank holiday mode just by clicking on holiday. It will then force the calendar into holiday mode. And whenever I do a test call, it's always going to follow that holiday prompt then. You'll have a little notice at the top just to say test overrides is active, and to deactivate that, just click in the drop down and then swap it back onto auto at the top of the modes there. Now there are also templates, so when you're starting your call flow, in the drop down you will have a DDI call flow. So that will set up a call flow for a particular user, and it will ask you the user that you want that to set up for. So that's for when you're setting up direct dial numbers. Once you've created that call flow, that can then be amended, and you could add user voicemail then to that call flow as well if you needed to. Our departmental no appointments call flow will take your calls directly into a team once it's checked the calendar, but it will give you the option of having a no appointments message on your calendar, which will automatically play when that's selected on there. We also have a departmental call flow that doesn't include the no appointments message, so those calls will all go straight into one particular team, and there's a very simple call flow there. Our main surgery call flow is the most popular, so this one will actually include a menu option. The menus as set up are 1 for appointments, 2 for prescriptions and 3 for reception, and it will allow you to select the group from the service delivery console that you want to answer those various calls. There's also a simple group call flow. This can be used to direct calls straight into a group without even checking a calendar, so that would normally be used for group short dials there. Now you can also change the way that the calls are distributed via the configuration console. So as this is an emergency bypass group, I'm going to make sure that the call priorities are set on high, so it pushes then to the front of any queue that those users are currently dealing with. So I'm going to use the menu just at the top next to my initials, and then I'm going to go straight to the configuration console from the service delivery console. You could also access that directly through the single sign-on by going back to the single sign-on tab and then clicking on configuration console. Once in the configuration console, you're going to have similar menus down the left-hand side that you do when you're in the service delivery console. And if you click on the groups menu, it will then give you a list of all the groups that you have set up in the service delivery console. You can either search or click on the edit button if you can see the group on the screen. So I'm going to click on the little pen on our emergency bypass group here, and that will then take me into the group properties. On the general tab, down at the bottom, we have our queue priority here. It's set on high, but you have three options, either low, normal or high. The majority of the groups are set up on normal priority, so that means you can increase your emergency bypasses to high, so that that will then push to the front of any queue that the users are currently dealing with. So during this session, we've looked at accessing the call flow through the service delivery console. We've looked at the Xflow icons that you can drag onto the desktop to create the call flow. We've looked at building a call flow, the call flow functions at the top of the desktop, and also the templates available when you're setting up a new call flow. We've also looked at changing those group call priorities so that you can make that into an emergency bypass number if you need to.